It's a lovely Friday morning here in Portland, Oregon, and I'm looking forward to the weekend. I hope you all have good weekends too. I'm going to make a pretty short video statement here that is really kind of a direct follow-on to my recent YouTube video about Lola and Willie Anderson and Brett Smitheram, which I hope you've watched by now, and is honestly one of my favorite videos that I've recorded. And I think that it is one that I kind of trapped people a little bit with, in terms of I started out in a very calm, rational place and got to a place later in there in which I yelled really loudly on camera and showed a lot of anger. But I'm not going to do that this time. I'm not angry at all. And in fact, part of the purpose in doing this is to make clear that even in a level-headed and not angry place, I still stand by everything I said in that video. And I very much believe it is true, even if it was delivered with emotion that might cause some people to believe me less or be less inclined to want to watch it. The fact is that my feelings of anger and hatred toward Brett Smitheram and Will Anderson are real. And I firmly believe what I said about their moral responsibility, their moral imperative, as I phrased it in the last video. And to me, this is something that's almost second nature. I remember when I was a preteen, one of the books I read was John F. Kennedy's book, Profiles in Courage, which is a great piece of historical essays in which, and granted it was probably ghostwritten, but Kennedy looks at several different figures in history who did something courageous in standing up against the prevailing wisdom or sentiment of the time, who put their own political reputations at risk for what they believed was true, for fighting the good fight. And I feel like I've had this idea internalized in my head for a very long time, that this is what people are supposed to do. This is the sort of heroic ideal. And I also think that one of the things I hope I communicated well in the Willie Anderson story, the little anecdote I started that video with, is that I very much understood other people's point of view and the way they were misperceiving this situation, misperceiving me and the Clinchies and what was going on there for a long time. And it was never a case that any of this was coming from a place of a lack of self-awareness or a lack of awareness of what the group dynamic was. I was just trapped in a situation in which people's perceptions were going in the wrong direction, and I had no way to actually reshape those perceptions back in a way that was closer to reality, because they lost trust with me, and they decided that they trusted and believed these people who really were dishonest people, who really misperceived the world themselves, and just continued on this freight train of going more and more in the wrong direction. And I do think that this is so much a problem of the world in terms of the silos of information, in terms of the way we, only hear things that we want to hear, this confirmation bias, and just keep bringing ourselves to a more and more wrong place. And I've occasionally used pretty strong language about this in the past, in other ways that I still do firmly believe, that a lot of this is related to what psychologists call an avoidant attachment style. I truly believe that people with avoidant attachment styles are morally inferior, and that most of the polarization, the separation, the silo effect of society is exactly because of that kind of thing. People decide they need, for their own feeling of safety, to cut themselves off from thoughts that are too different than theirs, from things that challenge their worldviews, and they allow themselves to get reinforced in those incorrect worldviews for longer and longer periods of time and get hardened in them and not see things the way they actually are. And part of being a moral human being is being someone who embraces the challenging ideas, embraces the things that make you question your own reality, that make you realize you might be perceiving things wrong, that you have to look at the lens by which you see things. And it's challenging. It's not easy. It's not easy to be a moral person. But I hope that people can see ways in which they might have been wrong. They might have been perceiving this wrong in the past. And that even if they didn't like me or believe me or trust me, they're starting to understand as more and more time passes how right I actually was and how wrong they were about certain things. At the same time, I want to be clear. I totally understand. I was the only male growing up in a house with my three sisters and my mother, and we had an abusive boyfriend in the house for some of that time. And it is the case that, like, I understand the point of view and the experience of a lot of women in the world, in that their physical safety is threatened by men, and that they've often had to learn a more indirect way of working, of not communicating very directly with people and using manipulation. I don't really mean it in a bad way here, but just manipulating emotions or finding ways to talk to people that is not about direct confrontation in order to provide for their own safety. And I totally get that. But there's a difference between doing that and really intentionally putting false stories and false narratives in people's heads. And I think that's really, really important to understand. Is that there are times where you might think that dealing with things in an indirect way is best. And one of the things I would say right away to you is that if you're dealing with me, you're probably wrong. Dealing with me in a direct way, you're actually going to get far better results. But I understand that you've been trained by other people to deal with people in an indirect way, and part of it is because of feelings of safety. So I have sympathy for the people who have avoidant attachment styles, who deal in more indirect ways. However, I do believe in the importance of honesty, and I do believe in the importance of rationality. At the same time, I recognize that I'm an outlier in a lot of ways. There are a lot of humans who only get moved by emotions, and you need to appeal to their emotions and not just their rational sense in order to get them to make any decision, in order to motivate them to do anything, to help in any way. And I'm not ignoring the importance of appealing to emotions and persuading people in an emotional way. But where I really draw the line is that when it is necessary to appeal to people's emotions, when it is necessary to move them emotionally in order to inspire them or get them to act, to take action, I think it is really important that any appeal to emotion has to be done toward an eye of getting the person to see the world more accurately, not less. Quite simply, if you are using appeal to emotion to try to get people to perceive things that are out of line with reality, that contradict reality, you are evil. You are on the side of bad. You are doing things that are objectively wrong. And it is only good, in my opinion, to appeal to emotion if you are actually getting people in the direction of reality. Now, again, you can make counterexamples of this. For instance, the Anne Frank story that I've mentioned before in another video. There are times where you might need to lie to authorities or put untruths out there because you're dealing with immoral authorities. But that's the thing about that, is that, as I explained in that video, that's really because society is living a larger lie. And you might need to cut some corners and reinforce certain untruths temporarily in those situations to protect yourself or to protect other people you care about. But in the long run, the fundamental way of fixing this is to fix the bigger lie in society. Thank you for listening.